Evening, everyone. I think hopefully you can hear us all. Yes, okay, I've got the thumbs up. Everybody can hear us. Welcome to video Scribal session number 7. Holy cow, this has been going on for a while. Um, we're trying theme music and background music tonight, so this should be fun. But tonight we are going to take a look at pearls and round objects. I've taken kind of a modified page from the jewel book of Duchess Anna of Bavaria. So that'll be fun. And if you've looked at the class form, it's 2 pages this year, or this year, week, because I've just got some modern sources, but it's good to kind of have those to take a look at how to paint round things, and shiny things, and not shiny things, because everything's got its own reflectivity and different ways light hits it. So yeah, four things to consider when doing round things. First is specularity, which is how different materials react to light. We've got dull, low gloss, and high gloss. The example on here is rubber. They did not have rubber in period, so we'll say wood. Unfinished, unpainted wood has a very low reflectivity. So your shading and highlighting is going to be a lot more subtle. Low gloss plastic, or say pearls, has kind of a medium reflectivity, so it's a less subtle and there's more of a bright highlight on that. And then if we have something that's high gloss like metal, it's a very not subtle at all. Your highlights are very high, your shade is very shady. When we look at color shading, you want to do tones of the same hue and not jump straight to black and white. This printout I have is not super great, but you can see it on your class handout. A more subtle, oh, fix the music, yes. Using different tones of the same hue will give you a more natural looking shading, whereas black and white is going to be very, it won't look natural. The exception to that being pearls, which are shades of gray. So we are going to be using some black and white on there. Radiosity is the last bit. You'll get shadows and environment reflecting onto your objects. That's more of a concern when you've got a lot of pearls or a lot of round things all close to each other. Tonight's little project, not so much of a concern. And again, more reflective materials are going to pick up more color. So if you have a white pearl next to a red ruby, you might get a little bit of red hue onto that white pearl, depending on how close it is. So those are just some things to think about. But the shading and the specularity is kind of what we're going to be taking into consideration tonight. Lower on the sheet here is just a quick little pearl primer I did when my apprentice was trying to figure out how to paint these things. So that's just something for reference we can have. So pearls. Again, low gloss type, so we're going to have a gradual shading from dark to highlight. and we're doing white, white pearls. There are certainly black pearls, which would give you a darker pearliness. So if you have the colors we're going to be using tonight, if you have a gray paint, that helps and makes mixing a little bit easier. I've got gray number 3. It's kind of a medium dark. Otherwise, you can do black and white. You don't need a whole lot of black to make your white into gray. So kind of play with those and see how we're mixing. For the background, or for the non-pearly things, so this book is, I don't know if it was all her jewelry or all jewelry that she just liked or stuff that she wanted to get made up. I don't know, but it's like 100 pages long of jewels and pearls and gold, and it's magnificent. So check out the link to that if you have nothing. Hello, yay! So for the other parts, we've got a background area here that's going to be in blue, and then the rim and the center motif would be gold. The example piece has all sorts of jet beads and things, and we'll get into jewels at a later point. But for the pearls, you'll need either gray and white or black and white, and we'll mix some colors for that. And then for the background, we'll have yellow, ochre, burnt umber, and a background color of your choice. Like I say, I like the Prussian blue. It's a beautiful dark, kind of makes it look like velvet, so that's fun. But to start here, we'll get a blob of white squeezed into the palette. 2 blobs actually, because we're gonna use one to mix with and one to lighten with. And then a little tiny bit of black. And we'll start with kind of a medium tone on the gray, because we don't want super dark pearls, but we need some contrast, so get that mixed in here. And this is way more black than we will need for 6 of these projects, but we'll just start with a little bit, work most of it off the brush, and mix with the white. And that's a pretty good light gray. We'll kind of start with that. And this is a piece, this is a project where if you're not in the habit of doing swatches, which I am generally not, it would be a good idea to do swatches. And actually what we'll do, we'll paint kind of a sample pearl. So we can kind of get this under our belt. There's a nice little round pearl. Yes, we're trying a background music experiment tonight. So you all just have something in the background and don't have to listen to me just breathing if I stop talking. So we'll see how that goes. But here's a swatch. There's our initial gray, which is a lovely medium gray there. And I like that, so we'll scoop a little bit of that into a separate well in the palette here. And since we know that's not going to be the lightest color, take a little bit of that and mix it in with the other white that we have. So you'll want pretty much 3 steps. You want a light, a medium, and a dark. And then because it's a pearl, we can use pure white for the highlight and it won't look funny. So there's hopefully our light. Paint that next to that one. And what we have initially mixed might actually be our dark color. So we can mix back some of the white into the little well that we've set aside there. So it's a lot of playing back and forth when you first start to get your shades kind of set. So yeah, that initial mix, and I did not add much black at all to that little puddle of white we had, and it made it a whole heck of a lot darker. So let's see where we are with that, and I think that looks pretty good there. So in the palette we've got light, dark, super dark, which we're not going to use, and our medium. So that should work. And can we? Okay, good. We can see the little sample bit there. So start with your medium color, because that'll be kind of the main part of the pearl. Get the glove on here. And you don't need to fill the whole thing in because you'll have the highlight bit and then the shadow bit, but you want to do most of it. So we'll kind of paint a nice roundy round, that's the technical term there. Fill in most of pearl there. So this is going to be your shadow on the bottom where we haven't filled in, and there's your highlight on the top. And then we're going to be doing a lot of pulling back and forth to get the blend nice and smooth. So some of that, we'll get the darkest here. When I mix these, I try to put my colors in gradient order on the palette, but that of course doesn't always work out, so we just have to remember to use from the correct well. And because it's paint, you can paint over it. So knowing which direction your light is coming from also is very important. With most medieval manuscripts, your light's going to be coming from the upper left down to the lower right. So make sure your shadows and highlights are reflecting that, as it were. So there's medium and dark on the bottom, and then your lightest on the top. Get the little circle in here, and it looks really funny right now because it's a ball with, it looks like a gobstopper, but we'll smooth that out. So there's our basics, and you can do this with hash shading. You can also do it by wetting your brush and dragging the gouache back and forth. So what I'm doing here is just little tiny lines, and you're making these, it's best to make them in the same direction as your light is casting, because the brush strokes will give dimension to, you know, it'll give a direction to the light. You don't want to pull them in the wrong way because it'll look funny. Because your eye is really good at discovering shifts in light and contrast. So we've got the light kind of pulled down, so now we can pull the medium up, and I'm barely touching the paper with this. It's a very subtle thing, but we're getting a blend, and you can kind of see that hard edge is becoming a little bit fuzzier. And this did kind of end up being a darker pearl, but that's okay. You can always mix your paints a little lighter, and we'll get lighter pearls. And now we take the darkest and just a few streaks up here and there. So now we've got kind of a blend going for that guy. Get a little tiny blob of white here for our highlight. Scoop out just a little bit more of the darkest gray, which we'll add the tiniest bit of black to for a darker shadow. It might be too much black or not enough. No, we'll try that. And again, doing this with the gray number 3 or whatever gray you happen to have, because it starts out a little bit lighter than the black, it's easier to mix your tones without them being quite so dark. But you can certainly make your own black paint, excuse me, gray paint with black and white. So we've got the white in here now, pure white for our highlight. And that's going to be just sort of a little half moon up at the top. And then kind of blend that just a little. Curves are important in all of this because everything here is round and we want it all to be round and curvy. And then the shadow on the bottom to define that lower edge. And there will actually be a highlight line also, because you'll get a little bit of reflectivity off your ground, your paper, onto that lower corner of the pearl. So the very faintest, skinniest of white lines on the bottom there. And then because there's a hole in most pearls, we'll wait for that to paint for the pearls is going to be more watery than perhaps other times that we use gouache. It shouldn't be, no. It's just paint. It's still gouache. The only more liquidy part would be if you decide to use pure water to blend. In period, the paints were egg tempera typically, which once it was dry on the paper, it was dry. So there was no on media blending. We can cheat a little bit with gouache because it's rewettable. So that's our modern cheat there. But no, you want to mix the gouache at pretty much as you would any other painting. So there's our pearl. One thing I could do is go a little bit, and here's where the playing back and forth happens. A little bit bigger into the highlight, the lightest gray color. And that might give it a little bit more definition there. Oh, no video. Everybody else can see us, right? Okay, good. We're in. She's in. Hi, Gwen. Good to see you. There's our lightest. And then we'll pull that down a little bit to blur the edge. And pull back up. And then we have a nice round pearl. So yeah, any questions before we go on to the main piece? Ask them now, because I'm going on. So up here on the piece that I've drawn out for tonight, we've got 2 round pearls and a little teardrop one. So same kind of technique for all 3, but the teardrop one is going to have more linear. You guys have my giant hand here because I can't remember where the camera is. More linear highlights on the upper side there. So get the paint mixed back up here. Half a drop of water because it's drying out like crazy tonight, even with the humidity. So that's fun. We've got the funny background music adjusted so they can hear me. Okay, good. I don't want to shout. So kind of, you know, we just start with the same thing. My pearls aren't necessarily round because I sketched them by hand. But with the gouache, you can make them round, or probably not square because that's a weird oyster doing that. There's our teardrop one. It's going to have a different highlight. So because they're round, also you'll see that I'm doing the medium color all the way up and around where the highlight is. Because they're round, your highest edge on the paper is not necessarily the highest, it's not the highest edge that the light is hitting. Yes, pearls aren't perfectly round anyway, exactly. Oh, so these colors, Gwen, you can either use gray number 3 or another gray that you have, or we have, what I've done here is I've mixed the ivory black and permanent white. And you don't need a whole lot of black to get your white to be not white anymore. It's very easy to turn white different colors, and it takes a little bit more white to darken, or excuse me, it takes a little bit more white to lighten a darker color than it does a darker color to change the whiteness of the white. Boy, that made a whole lot of sense. We'll catch up and revisit that later. But color mixing is a thing, and you just kind of have to play with it. I took a very small amount of black and put it in the white, and it ended up being the darkest color, or darkest shade rather, for these little pearls. And I thought it would be a nice medium to start with, and it ended up being this dark color here that I'm putting on the bottom. So we've got kind of a teardrop, and we'll have to clean that up a little bit. That's not too bad. And this guy here, the lower edge, nice and round and curvy. And this guy here. And again, these pearls, they're a little bit gray. So if you end up doing lots and lots of pearls, because there are certainly manuscripts out there with lots and lots of pearls on them, you'll find your happy pearl colors. And you don't have to do black and white either. There's some that have a bluish hue to them. All pearls aren't, freshwater pearls have that rainbow sheen. So once you get into different pearls and different jewels, there's all kinds of possibilities for color and hue and shade. So there's our basic pearls there that look very funny, kind of like Saturn. So we'll get the shading again, pull a little bit down and push a little bit up. our little bitty brush here, just to kind of soften the edges a bit. This guy here, and you can see, you know, we follow the basic shape of the drop. You don't want to do round highlights on a pear-shaped gem because it won't. That's not the way light works. There's that edge softened. Pull back and forth with the medium color. And the smaller the pearl, the less of this you kind of have to do because your eye will fill it all in. The larger the pearl, the more detail you can put in. So it may be that you end up needing a fourth shade, depending on how large your piece is. And then little tiny things. I painted birdseed once, so it's not just pearls that are round, birdseed is round too. And it was a matter of your medium color to do the little seed, and then a little tiny bright line at the top for a highlight and a dark line at the bottom for the shadow, and that was it. And it was perfect, and I had a happy little chickadee. Well, I assume it was happy. It was painted. So we'll call it happy. But just as an example of that, we'll do here's our little medium color here. Here's a little tiny pearl, seed pearl. There's the medium down there. And then we'll go with the bright white for the highlight because that's the brightest thing you have. And we just do a little zoop at the top. And then this dark gray that we mixed, a little tiny edge at the bottom, and there's a little mostly round ball. Shadows too, we'll talk about shadows once we get the base of everything in here. Because without shadows, it's all just kind of hanging out flat on the page, and that is very boring and not what we want. We want it to pop, and pop it will. Oh, can't see the tiny pearl. Can we zoom in on the tiny pearl? It's hard to see because it is tiny. It's kind of right there. Oh, might be, we'll get my tech guy on it here. We'll see. It's there. Oh. We're going to zoom in. This could get interesting. Adventures in camera work. So yeah, wee bitty pearl. And shifting focus. No, here we go. There we go. And it's hard too because it's a very pale pearl on, I'm doing this on Perg just for contrast. You can see I've got it taped to a piece of Bristol, so it's not gonna curl, and we can see kind of background. So there's, I think we've got that, so we can see the itty bitty pearl, Colette, I think, I hope. So pointing to it with my pencil, brush, end of the brush. Goodness. So I'll do, there's the pearl. So now I'm going in with the bright white, pure white, and we'll do the highlights on these three. Okay, better, good. We'll do the highlights on these three up here in the little medallion we're doing, and that's just a nice bright, and then a bright highlight on our pear shape, and then the one on the left here. So there's highlights, and then shadows on the bottom. And that kind of helps clean up the edge as well. And I think I went too far up there. We'll fix that. And again, you don't want to go too far up with your shadows because then it looks funny. So we'll get back in here with our darkest gray color and just sort of clean up that edge a little bit, and that looks more natural. There's that, and then the very last thing for these, we have the slight reflection on the bottom edge. And the little dark dot at the top. A little dot. And a little dot there. And a little dot so. And fix that where my hand shook. On the lower edge. Alright, so there's pearls and round things. You should have, I think, do they look round? I can't see what the camera sees, so yeah, those look pretty round. I'm gonna call that success. Coils, as Bugs Bunny would say. Or anybody from Brooklyn. I don't know. Do people from Brooklyn actually talk like that? Was Bugs Bunny supposed to be from Brooklyn? I don't know. What color are we using for the shadows? So it's just a little bit more black added in to the darkest combo of black and white. So I mixed I started with pure black and pure white, and then scooped the tiniest amount of black into the big blob of white, and got what I hoped was a medium color, but ended up being, we'll get the palette up here so we can all see. So there's my pure black, and these started out both white. Decent sized blob of white here, slightly smaller there. So I scooped the teeniest bit of black in with the white and mixed it. I hoped that was going to be the medium color, but it ended up being the dark when I swatched it there. And then I took some of that out and put it over here, added a bit of white to that and got the medium shade, and then added the tiniest bit of the darkest shade into the white here, and ended up with the lightest one. So once you figure out your darkest color, it's very easy to step down. It's pretty easy to go back in the other direction too. You just add the tiniest amount of black back. So that's how I did that. It's a lot of pulling back and forth. Like I said, if you don't do swatches generally, I don't, this is a good one to get into the habit of doing a swatch thing on, because it saves you some frustration and a lot of repainting. But those are the pearls. For the shadows, we need little bitty bit of burnt umber. I'm just going to mix that in with the white. So okay, there we are. So got our burnt umber here. The little tiniest blob ever. Little bitty bit. Because shadows are not black. They are dark brown or blue, depends what the ground is on them. That is not the mixing brush. Here's the mixing brush. So we'll kind of scoop that in there. And there's the color change. And I didn't even use the entirety of that little teeny tiny brown blob I had That's a nice shadowy color, and we'll just kind of swatch that there. Might want it just a little bit darker, so we are going to use that whole brown blob. There's that. So your shadows too. Can't hear the talking. Can't hear me talking? Anybody else having issues? Like I say, the music thing is an experiment, and if it doesn't work, we'll figure something else out. And I'll try and talk a little louder. But shadows, we'll put them in with the pearls and then add it in to the other. So the pearls are going to be lifted off the paper a little bit on the medallion. Something here we have just a little bit on the leading edge, very thin where it would touch the paper, and then following out on that little guy on the bottom there. And here's for our little birdseed pearl, the tiniest little thing. This is not really the right brush to use that for. But it sort of fades out towards the leading edge, or the trailing edge, I guess, because it is a round object. And as the light bends around it, it will shift its shadow a bit. So it won't be a solid black outline, or a solid dark shadow rather. So for the rest of the jewel up here, we've got yellow ochre, which will mix with some white and a little burnt sienna for highlights and shadows. Like I say, Prussian blue for the background. We'll start with that. That'll just be a solid color there. And then we'll be done. This is connected. These are connected with chain. So that'll be a fun little painting experiment as well. We'll mix up Prussian blue. I like working from the bottom up, starting with the darker colors and the backgrounds, because it's a little bit easier to go back over it afterwards. And Prussian blue is interesting. It's one of the more translucent colors, so getting a nice solid color in the background can be interesting. So we'll see how it's working tonight. Got that there. Oh, beautiful, beautiful dark velvet. And this is my cinquefoil here. It's part of a badge that I have. I've got 3 of them on my arms, my registered arms, forget-me-nots basically. And then the badge is also 3, but I am too lazy to paint 3 tonight, so we're going to paint 1. But for your own self, pick your, you can make your own jewelry here. A motif that appeals to you. Ermine spots are lovely, but there's shading in here too that we'll get to once we get the background in and all that. And again, working on Perg like I am here, Pergamonata, It is not a fan of a lot of water in your paint, so for larger areas like this, you want your paint to be a little bit drier, mixed. Otherwise, you'll get a lot of curling. There's always some curling. I haven't quite mastered paint on perg yet, but we're getting there. We're getting there. Another 200 scrolls or so. We might make some progress. So almost done. Get the background in. So on the setting, as it were, you may be tempted to add metallic gold or mica in with your paint. Really study the source. I think, as far as I can see, we don't have it in front of us, of course, it's on computer screen, but it appears to me that there's no sort of actual gold sheen to the settings for all these jewels. So again, we're going to go with yellow ochre as a base and a lighter yellow, yellow ochre lightened with white for the highlights, and a yellow ochre darkened with a bit of burnt sienna for the shadows. I use burnt sienna instead of black because the black is not pure black. It has kind of a greenish base, and if you mix that with yellow, you get not yellow, where the burnt sienna will just sort of darken things. Yes, the music tonight was brought to you by Bardcore. Sorry, it was a little bit strangely balanced for some. We'll try it again some other way. It was kind of amusing. We amuse ourselves. So, get all the blue out of my mixing brush here. There we go. Add a few drops. A few more drops because my yellow ochre is old and drying out. We'll get that mixed up. And if you have, Naples yellow, that starts out being a lighter color, so you might want to add a little burnt sienna right off the bat. But I find I like yellow ochre for my kind of medium yellow color. So we'll start here. And starting on the bottom with the pearls, there's of course the little bump on the bottom where your head pin goes through to hold the pearls onto the setting. We'll get those little guys, and then we have a chain connecting it to the upper bit. And you can see here that I didn't try with pencil to draw the individual links of the chain. There's just a line there. Your brush has some dimension to it, so take advantage of that. That also comes in handy with something like very fine Celtic knotwork. Don't drive yourself bonkers trying to draw both halves of this nutty knotwork thing. Just draw the pattern out with your pencil and your brush. Use a slightly wider brush to get the actual knotwork, and then go in and figure out the unders and the overs with your very fine line work brush. So that's a little bit of a sanity saver tip. So we've got the 3 little chain bits. Now we'll get the outer gold bezel. I guess it's a bezel. I'm not a jewelry maker, I'm a painter, so we'll call it a bezel. I think that's right. Get that in there. And again, on here, I'm not outlining before I paint. We're kind of outlining and painting at the same time. Whatever you are comfortable with. And you don't have to have your paper taped down. I'm going to rotate it and make everybody dizzy here because you find the angle that your hand is comfortable in moving. Also, this comes in handy for the long outlining. Sometimes it's a vertical line that you can be comfortable with. Sometimes it's horizontal pulling. You know, whatever works for you. There's that, and then we'll get this in here in gold, as it were, sort of pyrite, fool's gold. Like a little medallion. Maybe this will be the first thing I've ever painted for myself in 12 years. Crazy. Part of it too, though, I stare at a scroll for a week at a time, and by the time I'm done with it, I don't want to look at it anymore, so I'm glad to have it out of the house. So, art is fickle. All I can say about that. Well, it's not all I can say about that. Otherwise, this would be a very quiet rest of the video. I better keep saying things. We'll clean up the edges a bit with shadows and highlights. Add some depth to the interior of the petals as well. And the one danger going darker with light on top of it, of course, is your darker background color you can sometimes re-wet with your lighter foreground paint. And again, that's where also working with a slightly drier paint comes in handy, not only for the curling, but for the opacity on that. So there's lovely yellow ochre. Fill in right along there. There we go. So now, adding just a little bit of burnt umber to the ochre. I'm gonna squeeze out a little bitty blob of that. And the well right next to it there, and we'll get that mixed in. Adding yellow ochre to the brown. Now we have iced coffee. Delightful. A little bit more, that should lighten it a bit. Should be a good color there. Yes, and there's burnt sienna, and then there's raw umber and raw sienna. Nobody can figure out how to cook those things. It's very frustrating. You'd think after so many hundreds of years we would figure out how to cook our siennas and our umbers properly, but no. There's a little bit of white, and we'll add a little bit of yellow ochre to it. And that's going to be too light, so we'll add a little bit more yellow ochre to it. Because we don't want a bright white highlight on the gold. The gold is a lovely, soft, glowy type metal. So a nice soft highlight will be the way to go with that. Well, you're the first person in the history of this particular chat to make that joke, so I think we'll call it a win. All right, so now we have, I'm gonna get this here. Your piece looks like it needs polishing. Well, we'll get there. We'll get there. So I find it easier sometimes to do the shadows first. So again, shadows are going to fall on the edge away from the light. And we'll get in here and do one bit of chain there, and there, and then the inside of that chain and outside of that one. Get a little bit of depth already, and the bottom of our little eye pins that are holding said pearls. A little bit there, and this guy. So the angles on these are kind of interesting because you're going to get different light on different sides. The bottom trailing edge of the round bit is still going to be shaded, but that shadow is going to creep over onto the other side of the chain just a bit, and then it'll still be shadow on that side because it's going to be shaded by the medallion itself. So that's where kind of knowing where the light is and knowing what's connected to what is something you've got to really pay attention to. And there's that, and there. So now we find out how steady my hand is tonight. Get the trailing edge of the medallion or the brooch, kind of up the side there. And that's about where the light's going to start shifting and hitting the upper corners. I'll get this down in here. And I have lovely steady hands tonight. Delightful. So if you go to do your outlining and you find your hand sort of makes it look like a seismograph, stop. Have some less coffee or more coffee, depending on your particular caffeine needs. And just practice, you know, more practice will get you more brush control and you'll have nice, clean, straight lines. You can also, so there's the ruling pen, which is great for nice straight lines. I find it hard to use and it tends to blob on me. It either blobs or it doesn't let go of the paint at all if I try to use it on a piece that I've already put paint on. I haven't quite gotten to the proper paint mix for that. It either needs to be drier or I need to open it more or less. It's very tricky. But you can also buy, there's a ruling pen that's basically attached to a compass that you can load up and draw your circle with that. So now we'll do in here, again, the trailing edge and the lower parts of this cinquefoil in here are going to be more in shadow. That's where your shadows are going to be, and then the highlights are up on top. But the interior of the petals will also have some dimension as well. So we'll come back to this in a bit. And then we'll get that guy in there. Oops. And there's that. And then we'll have a kind of a center piece there. So now we have our shadows or our darker pieces all in. We'll see if we've got the highlight mixed. So we'll go around the upper edge with our highlight. And we might, it looks pretty good. Might add just a touch more white. We'll see what it looks like when it dries. And again, we have the importance of swatching. Please do as I say and not as I do. Yeah, I think we're gonna add just a touch more white to that little bit there. It just needs to be a little bit brighter so it pops. We'll get that white mixed in. You don't want to make it bright, bright white, but you want to make it light enough so that there's contrast. And there's some contrast here, but more is better in this case. And adding the white thickened the paint a little bit, which will make it a little bit better. There we go. Pull that over so you get the highlight. The light's coming from this direction. And we'll have the inner ring also, because this piece is kind of it's set back. In this little bezeled ring. And yes, we must compare and contrast. And if I had compared my contrast, we wouldn't have had to remix the paint. But here we are. Paint mixed, life is good. There's those. And then we get the little highlights, little tiny highlights in here on the chain. Just a little tiny bright spot here and there. Give it some dimension. And there's that.
Let's see if I can improve the focus.
Oh, and we're going to improve focus here perhaps. Sorry, it's been blurry. So I'm just gonna keep painting, and Twig's gonna meddle with the focus here. But we've got the highlight coming in now on the interior motif. Nice and bright. Get the edges. Again, leading edge, because it's going to be raised up just a little bit. By there. Better? Hey, better. Nice and clean. So we can see, hopefully that looks like it's starting to be three-dimensional now. It's still kind of light up here, or not much contrast up there. Kind of play with that a little bit. But now for the inside. So the petals on this are cupped. So you're going to get a bright highlight coming up from bottom, like so. And here again is where we'll play a bit with pushing and pulling paint, because we don't necessarily want a super sharp edge, though this is metal, so your edges and your contrast are going to be a little bit more defined than your pearls are, because it does have more reflectivity. Now, if we have a matte textured, you know, brooch or something, then that goes more towards the pearl side of things. So you have to consider, is it polished metal or not polished or partially polished? And then mirrors is a whole other thing entirely, and I haven't gotten into mirrors yet because, oh boy. So there's some depth happening there, and then we'll do very thin lines up here to get the upper edges kind of defined. So very more of a subtle shadow there, but wherever you have a highlight underneath it in this particular format, you also want a little bit of a shadow, just to show the depth. And I missed the shadow there, so you can kind of fill that in. So yeah, that's kind of a three-dimensional little cinquefoil there. Get a little bit of softening. Barely any paint on the brush to do this. You almost don't even touch the paper. A very light brush. Just so it's not quite so firm an edge. So there's your basic. So if you have, again, going back to the ermine spot, you know, it's got 3 dots at the top with little flag thing at the bottom. You treat the dots exactly like you would the pearls. Decide if they are recessed or, you know, concave or convex. And that will sort of determine which end of things, which side of things your highlight is on, and your low light, your shadows. So as an example, we'll paint a dish, basically. Can we see it if I put it down here? Yes, okay, I'm gonna put it down there. So here is, we'll do a little example piece down here. There's your base model for a dished round thing, using our yellow ochre and our darker. Let that dry. And again, it's the same sort of, you still want the highlight on the top because it does have, it's got that bright leading edge, and you'll want a shadow on the bottom. So there's your upper highlight. I have to give this drying time. And shadow on the bottom. But then inside your upper highlight, a very thin shadow, which is way thicker than I wanted it to be. So we're going to come back and do another highlight there. Cover over it with more yellow ochre, kind of blend that in a little bit. That was crazy. There we go. Made that nice and thin. And also your highlight and your shadow don't always meet. There's a point where the light is just light, and if your highlights and your shadows all connect, it looks kind of cartoony and not realistic. And for this anyway, we're going more for realistic. But there's your highlight, your shadow, and then the lower highlight here, which will be a little bit bigger because your dish is going to catch more of that light. Things are drying strangely. There's kind of a dishy looking thing. And even here you can use, I don't have any. Yeah, you don't want to use pure white on this because again it will make the contrast too much. Turner Design Gouache. Yes, good side note. Turner Design Gouache is a very good brand. I've never used it, but several people I know have and they like it. So I'm not sure how pricing compares to whole bean or anything, but I have heard good things. So there's our little medallion. Now shadows on this are going to be a little different because they're not laying flat on the ground like our example pearl kind of did. It's laying on a background. So the light shadow is sort of attached to it here. And we'll go back over that because I just shadowed all over my piece. But getting your basic shape in, and the shadow will follow the shape of your medallion or whatever it is, but you have to remember to stop where the light stops. So right about, a quarter of the way, not even a quarter of the way up your other side, you want to fade that in. And kind of make it pop off the page here. Your chain will also have shadow. Pop that there. And then the pearls will have a little bit of shadow also. But again, only on the absolute leading edge of them. And right about there is where your shadow's going to stop up top. Shadow on the chain, shadow on the funny pear pearl. And here's where, again, brush stroke direction is important. As is fading. I'll get this last one in here, kind of a blobby pearl, but a pearl. And this one here is on the leading edge of the light, so you're going to have less shadow or none at all at the top and a little bit more on the bottom because it's got nothing to kind of shield it. So there's, I think we're mostly there. Would it make sense to highlight the edges of the blue in any way? It depends what your blue is. If I'm considering that velvet basically sucks in any and all light and you don't really get a highlight. You may get a shadow. You would get a shadow up in this upper edge here, where it meets and goes underneath the bezel a bit. But it's so subtle, it's almost not worth for this little piece putting it in. You could, the inner bit here would have some shadowing, which, let's see here, if I take a little bit of this, and here's where you can mix, here's where you can mix in black if you already have a slightly blue piece. So if it was like an enamel, then yes, you'd have some shadowing, you'd have some highlights, because it would be a shiny thing and light will bounce off of it differently. So it all depends on what material it's actually made out of. So mix in a little bit of black with the blue, and that may have just gone very dark, but we'll find out. And it does have a slight green tint to it now because the ivory black is so weird. So again, maybe mixing the burnt sienna in with the blue is the way to go also, because this has a definite kind of bluey green tint, but it is definitely darker. This is what I just mixed the black into. There's the original Prussian blue, so definitely darker. And if we just do a line here where the fabric would be tucking underneath the gold, again, that helps kind of clean up the wobbly edge also, and kind of feather that out just a little bit. So straight out of the tube, some colors like Prussian blue, it's hard to get anything that's actually darker than they are, even if you add black or a burnt sienna, just because the contrast, it's going to be so subtle. So if you are doing a background with, Prussian blue, something like that, lighten it a little bit and make that your base color, and then straight out of the tube is your shadow color. And then, you can always lighten. So it's there's a little bit of contrast here. If the sink foil is raised like it is, there'd be a little shadow on the velvet in the back here, like so, and a bit like so, and then fill that right in like that. So anywhere where it's coming up, like in the little spaces between the petals, that's going to be very dark. You're not going to get a lot of light from your source coming in there, just because it's in the middle of everything. But this one up here, this spot up there, that's in bright light land. So no shadows there because there aren't any, but here, this gap is shaded by the petal up top. This gap is shaded by everything around here. You've got shadow coming in from that petal on the bottom there. Kind of follow that around. But that's where we are with that. Oh, and now that it's dried some, here's your little dished dot on the bottom. So you can sort of see it's curved, I hope. It sort of looks more dished than rounded. Quick do a rounded dot just for contrast so we can see the difference between the pearl and a gold dot. Here's our round thing. And you can certainly do this too, like I did the pearl, which, you know, started with empty spaces that you filled in with the lighter and darker colors. But something like this is just a little that. And then we have highlight. I went over that the wrong way, so we'll go back over it like so. And back and forth, mushing the color around. A little highlight here at the bottom. And there's our cute little round gold dot piece of bird seed, whatever it is up there. So that's what I've got for the evening. Pearls and gold and velvet backgrounds, oh my. Little chains. Anybody have any questions while we're here at the end? Gwen, I know you missed the beginning, but we can go back and watch it at your leisure. I just went over the 4 little ball examples that are on page 2 of the class sheet. So, but hope everybody enjoyed, and if you painted along, I would love to see you post what you did. I'll toss this one up on the groups, and yeah, we'll see you in 2 weeks and see what we come up with for then. Everybody have a good night. It was great to see everyone, and happy painting.